Do you own a company or even work for a company where your product doesn't necessarily have to do with benefiting the environment directly, but you want to have an impact on the environment and your local community? Then this is the episode for you to listen to. And if you want to help your company get in line and try and help the environment and your community, this is also the episode that is for you. Because I am speaking to Bernie Geiss, who is the founder of the Cove Contuinity Advisors. This is an insurance company that works to have an impact to protect the environment. He is part of 1% for the planet. He helped create 1% for people. He's a B Corp company. He's part of Offsetter's Carbon Neutral in 2022. He's also part of Climate Smart, another program. And this is a company that has to deal with insurance. It doesn't necessarily have to deal with direct environmental benefit. We're going to talk to Bernie why he's so involved in the environment and his community, as well as running a profitable business. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean. And if you listen to my episode, the last episode right before this, where I talk about science communication and how we need to get away from, material goods and this materialistic society and worry more about the impact. You heard me talk about Bernie Geiss. He is the founder of Cove Contuinity Advisors. They are an insurance broker. They sell insurance to people. They make sure that they're set for in case something ever happens. But they also have this mission, this almost like secondary mission, that's part of his values and his company's values, to do good for the environment, to help make the environment a sustainable place, to work with communities or in and around the area where he lives, and just to make the area around him better. And we're going to talk about that today, why he does this through his business, through his team, his staff, his employees, and why he's a B Corp certified company. This is something that I've been getting into for quite some time now, and I've been able to interview a number of people who have been part of the B Corp certification process and why they're part of it, what their values are, why they want to protect the environment, why they want to help local communities. And this is all part of conservation, especially when you're trying to protect the ocean. So Bernie's here to talk about a bit of how he kind of came into doing his company, how he has an impact on the world, and how he just wants to be independently, satisfied, independently sustainable, really, and be able to bring that to others and help their employees, their team culture through helping with the environment, teaming up with people, collaborating with organizations to help make conservation more sustainable. There's a lot in this episode. So here's the interview with Bernie Geiss. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Bernie, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about B Corp business and protecting the ocean and protecting the environment?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. Yes, I'm absolutely ready to talk about it. I love to talk about it.
This is awesome. This is this interview came from like an ongoing thing that I've been wanting to do and connect with more B Corp businesses because I want to find out sort of why people join the B Corp sort of program, the certification and auditing, and why it's important for them. And then I just sort of discover through conversation with each and every one of you that the impact is really big. And you guys are really focused on not only protecting the environment, but developing like relationship with like people, local communities, and just really impacting everybody around you, including your employees and so forth. And I've just fallen in love with the fact that there's this B Corp program around and watching all these businesses do such great things, especially for the environment and for people, which we know is very important to protecting the environment and conserving our planet and our oceans. And I came across you through LinkedIn, and I messaged you, and I was like, hey, I'm really curious. You have a company which is not really focused on the environment. It's focused on you'll talk about that in a sec, and what your company is focused on, and then but you have a lot of values where you want to conserve relationships, conserve like sort of relationships with people and the environment and have that impact. And I think that's really important. So we're going to get into all that, and I can't wait to do that. But before we do, Bernie, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Bernie Geiss, as you mentioned. I live in North Vancouver, Canada. Um, I am the founder of Cove Contuinity Advisors, which is an insurance brokerage firm. I'm married. I have three grown-up kids. I love to mountain bike. I love to run in the trails. Done a few ultra marathons in the trails, and
Oh, wow.
love to. I've learned how to surf with my dear friend Travis at Bodhi Surf and Yoga down in Costa Rica.
we had, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy the outdoors and spending time with friends.
That's awesome. And so where now, I think people should know the context because I live in Ontario. You live on the west coast in BC, North Vancouver. There's a big difference. I think when I say that I like going hiking and trails and running on trails, and when people from Vancouver go, you guys have trails, you guys have mountains, you like when you go mountain biking, and like that's some serious biking. That's like upper level, like
Yes,
it's not
yes,
for beginners kind of thing. I'm sure there's some beginner areas, but it's not for beginners. I think people from Ontario like myself, who's not a huge into biking, would have a very difficult time doing what you do. So I think having that in, but the thing with people who grew up in BC, there's that environment. You have the mountains, you have the ocean, you have these massive, like you have basically a rainforest and these massive trees, and it's just you're very engulfed in the environment. Would you say that's true in terms of your how you grew up and your childhood was very focused on being around the environment?
yeah, absolutely. I was just explaining to somebody the other day the beauty of living where we live. We live on the base of Mount Seymour, which is one of the three mountains on the north shore of Burrard Inlet across from Vancouver. It actually is a ski hill on the top, and our
Oh,
driveway is
wow.
17 minutes from the parking lot up there. So I was just explaining to somebody that we can actually go skiing, we can go kayaking, we can play golf all in the same day at the right time of year. So it's really amazing. We can't really get away from it.
Yeah.
We live on the edge, literally out of our back gate. We live at the edge of Mount Seymour Provincial Park, which extends all the way over hundreds of kilometers to Whistler behind us. So we can literally walk our way to Whistler off road. A little bit of a tough hike. Yeah, so
Yeah.
mountain biking and hiking and trail running is a big part of the lifestyle of living here. And in fact, the North Shore is claimed to be the birthplace of mountain biking, downhill mountain biking. So
Ah,
uh,
okay.
that's uh, that's debated by a few people from different areas, but we'll go with it. But to
We'll
answer
go
your
with it for
question
now.
is, I grew up in Prince George, which was a rural community. It's a logging-based community, logging and mining. I grew up in a community which, for all intents and purposes, was based on the outdoors.
Hmm.
Snowmobiling was a big thing when I was young. Ice skating on the frozen ponds, frozen lakes, spending time camping, being in a boat, fishing, riding, little motorcycles through trails when I was very young. So the outdoors has always been a big part of my life. And then I spent almost 3 years traveling with a tent and a backpack in various parts of the world, and where I lived out in nature pretty consistently. So that's always been something that has given me peace, and it's something that I would really love to be able to protect if I can, because it's such an amazing resource.
And that's great. And I think, a lot of people would probably say the same. I feel like people on the West Coast are very focused on, or more focused on protecting the environment because you cherish it so much because you see a variety of different environments as you've described. And it just seems to be like people from BC are just a little bit more environmentally conscious in terms of their policies and their governments and so forth, which is great to see. Um, but when you grow up, and as you grow up and you go through school, you went the business route and the insurance route. And some people would say, okay, you would get away a little bit from that protection, or as your business is kind of like diverging from that, maybe you keep protecting the ocean as a hobby, or protecting the environment as a hobby, and being more nature focused as a hobby. So you're running, you're biking, skiing and kayaking, which is all great. But you wouldn't expect, nobody would expect you to use that with your business. Now, so you went through school, what was your education in school? Like, what was your focus? Was it business? Was it
Well,
marketing,
I'm going to tell you
economics?
a secret, and
Okay.
I love to tell people this, is that I actually dropped out of high school in grade 12, and I spent 5 years traveling. I
Okay.
was not a big fan of conventional education,
Okay.
and math I didn't like. I came back, tried to go to college to become an accountant, and that really bored me to tears. And so one of the things I did while I was traveling was I I learned how to meditate. I learned from some great Buddhist teachers and also some well-known teachers in India. Spent quite a bit of time there. And one of the things that when I came back to Canada, I thought, well, how am I going to make a living? How am I going to, be self-sufficient? Because that's what
Hmm.
really became important to me, is the sense of self-sufficiency. And I thought, well, life insurance is a really interesting tool because you talk about death all the time, and I'm very
Yeah.
comfortable with that. And I became comfortable with that from my background in studying philosophy, etc. And
Right.
so I thought I'd give life insurance a try. And really, there was nothing altruistic about it, except in the sense that I knew I didn't have to go back to university or college to do it. I could get training and education through the development of or attaining professional designations through the industry. Because they didn't offer
Hmm.
those educations in university anyway. So even if I would have gone to
Right.
university, I would have had to do those as well. So I was all about taking the shortcuts.
Right.
Uh, and the key was is I wanted to build self-sufficiency for myself, but at the same time, I wanted to help provide that to the people that I worked with. Life, disability, and critical illness insurance is an incredibly valuable tool because it's there for people when catastrophe hits, a death in the
Mm,
family, a disability. And I've got lots of anecdotal stories about how that's changed people's lives, but that's not the point of this discussion.
right.
Really, what it did for me was it gave me the ability to stay independent, not to have to work for somebody. I could become an
Hmm.
independent broker, and I could develop my business according to the philosophy and values that I held dear to my heart, instead of having to work for somebody else under their values and principles.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes, I mean, it is, other than the fact that it's scary to have your own business because it relies on, your motivation, but your motivation was, I want to become independent. I don't want to have to rely on somebody to hire me or fire me or let me go or whatever that might be. And then their value system, and then what they would require, quotas and so forth, and all that goes along with the business. And so that's, I like that. I respect that. Now, with, fast forwarding into, the values and the business, as the business is growing, um when did, the thought of taking your values and impacting the people and sort of the environment sort of start to become reality? Like, I assume you always had that in mind. When did it start, and how did you first, like, sort of visualize that being implemented in your business?
That's a really good question, Andrew, because a real transition happened in 2013. I met a business coach, and I was interested in looking for a different way of doing business because, quite frankly, I'd been successful. I was bored. I really did. I really felt like I put myself on a treadmill. And one of the reasons that I felt that way is because there was a certain part of me that I held back in my business, i.e., expressing my values and the
Hmm.
principles of how I want to live and do business. I held that back, and I met a business coach who, after a 2-hour interview, said to me, Bernie, she said, I look around your business and I look at everything related to your business, and I don't see you. Like, you have an amazing story to tell. You have
Mm.
amazing values in terms of how you're implementing them behind the scenes. But why don't you tell that story? And in the process, she said, have you ever heard about B Corp? And I go, no. And she goes, well, look into it because you need to be playing in a different sandbox. And I thought, oh, okay. Um, back to the sandbox. But the
Yeah.
reality is, what she was saying is, she said, I needed to think about operating in a different environment than the one that we were focused on, that was based purely on the traditional economic model of growth and uh, growth. I wouldn't say growth at all cost, but pretty much, as you mentioned
Right.
earlier in our discussion, growth without much concern about anything else. And so
Right.
that's, I hired her, and we developed a very um, key document called, our differentiation blueprint. And it gave me license to start talking about the things that I really cared about. And in doing that, I discovered, what a B Corp was. And I had the
Hmm.
same reaction that you had when you think about an insurance business being environmental advocates. Is I thought, oh, that's for companies that are, uh, work in the health food industry, that are, developing green energy sources. And I thought, I'm really not that. And I don't think that it really, applies to me. But I went in and I did the B impact assessment, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting, because what I'm discovering is it's actually teaching me a whole bunch of ways that I can be better,
Mm.
or that we can do business better. And I thought, all right, I'm going to give this a crack. Andrew, one of the things about B Corp is, when you think about it as a business owner, you think, you, everybody thinks they're pretty good. Everybody thinks,
Right.
I do things differently. I do things better than the average, or better than
Right.
most, or better than anyone. You can go there too. But the reality is that nobody is holding you to account. And so
Mm.
we had a sense that we were pretty good, but there was hesitation in doing the B impact assessment, because I didn't want somebody to prove to me that I wasn't as good as I thought I was.
Yeah, I can see that.
The interesting thing is that after doing the assessment, it confirmed that we are actually doing a really good job. But in doing the assessment, I realized there's so much more we could be doing.
Mm.
And that's what I found exciting. So just doing the B impact assessment helped me think about how we can expand our vision to be much bigger than it already was, and how we could genuinely start focusing on being a force for good and doing good, as
Right.
part of our corporate strategy. So that was a really exciting time.
So do the guidelines and sort of the vision, does that, like with the B Corp, does that include, we hear talks about businesses being social enterprises. Does that like does it give you the guidance to convert to a social enterprise? Or is it just more of, you decide how you want to implement those guidelines, and whether you're a social enterprise or not, it doesn't really matter. You're just focusing on, this is how I want to impact this is how I want my business to impact the world. And here are some guidelines that other companies have done, or what B Corp has considered successful in the past.
So I think there's a bit of a misnomer around the terminology of social enterprise, because
Yeah.
when you think about it, to be a good company, like, who would have ever thought that a company that makes solar panels would be a social enterprise?
Hmm.
But the reality is that what they're doing, their business model has a positive impact on the planet. It reduces greenhouse gas in the generation of
Hmm.
electricity. Well, that has a social benefit, because the reduction in greenhouse gases, the reduction in pollution is good for the community. Plus, what I love about alternative energy sources is it decentralizes the infrastructure. You no longer have to be working at a refinery, or in Canada's famous tar sands, in order to be engaged in the energy business. You can be installing solar panels locally, to create energy locally, and you can be doing that in a community that, maybe requires some extra assistance to actually be able to implement it. So
Yep.
a business, I wouldn't say that it's a move towards being a social enterprise. I think the great thing about the B Corp movement and the B Impact assessments, it simply tells you how to be a better business while taking into account all of our stakeholders. So we literally go through all five categories of our stakeholders, and the environment being one of them. And we say, all right, how can we be better as it relates to this stakeholder? So it's an incremental process as opposed to saying, this is what my goal is going to be in terms of transforming my
Gotcha.
business. Improving your business is an incremental process which happens step by step. And to the degree that you bump up to a limit and you can't change anymore,
Hmm.
maybe that's as far as you go. But the reality is, you're better off, the world is better off because you went through those steps than they are if you hadn't taken those steps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's almost like it's actually almost like very a business. Um, I guess it's like a way to do business in essence as you're growing your business. It's not you're not going to go from 0 to 100 in 2 days. You're going to take these sort of baby steps and implement certain parts of your company. And so, whether it be one, you're not going to come out with a diverse number of products right off the bat. You might start with one and then you build to different products. Here is like you've got 5 pillars. Okay, let's start off with one. Where do you see this going, and then how can you build it out? I love that idea. It makes so much sense, and it sounds like it works because it's incremental, and I like that. I think that's really great to be able to do. Now, as someone who runs a side business myself, I'm always worried. Like I always want to do good. You always want to do better. You always want to help people out and see what you can come up with that would be like the best impact and programs and so forth. But you look at like, okay, how much revenue am I bringing in, and how much is this going to cost me to do all these programs, or to have more impact, have my business have impact, and what is that going to cost the company? Is it going to make it so that I can't pay my employees as much money, or is it going to make it so I'm not going to make as much revenue, and maybe I can't pay my bills? Like, how much does it cost to do all this kind of stuff? Like I would imagine the business owners are probably like right off the bat. That's one of the questions that you're looking at, is this, how much is this all going to cost me? Is that something that you looked at? Is that a question that was on your mind when you first started thinking about the B Corp?
Oh, of course it is. Every time a new idea comes up, there's always the cost benefit analysis that has to go with it.
Hmm.
I think that the different differentiating point about this journey is that how do you measure the benefit of doing good? There's the cost benefit analysis of, I invest this much in this infrastructure, it should give us a reduction or an increase in efficiency and a reduction of costs. In this particular case, you have to think about, well, what is my investment in going to be in doing good? So that's where we take the 1% for the planet as a benchmark. Like 1% of our top line revenue is dedicated, and we will pay that even if we have to go into our line of credit, which fortunately we've never had to do, but we're committed to that as the number one thing that comes off the top. We created a fund called 1% for People to match that environmental contribution, because we realize that it's great to say that people should act for the benefit of the environment, but there are many people, the vast majority of people, they can't afford to.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it asking them to do something, yes, they can do what they do, but asking them to do things that they have no control over because of lack of economic benefit, economic position, I think is not the right approach. So we created this 1% for People, where we've dedicated that fund to creating self-sufficiency and independence for people in our community, which means that if they have an opportunity to grow and they have an opportunity to become self-sufficiency, then they have the capacity to think about fixing the environment. So we wanted to balance that off. So when we think about our commitment from a financial perspective, we think about it from the perspective of 2% of our top line revenue is going directly to programs to fight environmental change,
Hmm.
climate change, and 1%
Hmm.
to create independence and self-sufficiency for community members. So when that becomes the benchmark, we no longer are looking for a return, because you can't say, okay, if I give money to this scholarship program, it's going to come back to me in X number of dollars. There has to
Hmm.
be the desire simply to exercise generosity. And so for us, this is our opportunity to exercise generosity and focus it in areas that we really care about, that will make a difference. And that's what ultimately led to, on the environmental side, us focusing on organizations that are driving systemic change and not just combating the symptoms of climate change.
I love it. I mean, a lot of conservation now is really focused on people, and making sure that people are able to do so. A lot of a lot of the research that's coming out now, or has been coming out, really focuses on getting people to a position, because a lot of the issues and areas that have issues, whether it be climate, whether it be atmosphere, it has a lot of health issues, and usually it's in areas that are impoverished, or
Yes.
the areas where people can't afford. They're worried about just surviving than they are worried about the environment. And so the 1% for the people program just sounds, it sounds like it's like it should be 2%, for the planet and the people. It makes sense. You know what I mean? Where it should be almost like coupled, so that you can do both. But I love the fact that you come up with this program, where the focus is on people. Then you have another program where the focus is on the planet, and it's 2% off your revenue. And I think that um, that's pretty nice. And when we think about businesses, we think about, okay, what can we donate, in terms of funds, and what we can provide from a financial perspective to help others in our community and around us. And then other companies will really look at um, you know really diving into the community, and where the business owners, as well as some of the employees, or all the employees, actively participate in and around the local community, so they can benefit their local community. We talked a little bit before we pressed record. We talked, I was saying it's nice to see businesses not just doing, beach cleanups and stuff, but then you mentioned, actually, we do beach cleanups as well.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about that, in terms of what your company does, in terms of active participation
Yes.
within the community?
Well, two things we do some projects with for indigenous communities close to us, and one other project which I'll just talk about, which I think exemplifies what you're talking about, is that there is an organization on the North Shore of Vancouver called the North Shore Streamkeepers, and there was
Hmm.
a creek, a major salmon spawning ground that had been lying dormant since the early 1900s because of the sawmills that built up around. And what happened was the entire um, uh, the creek mouth um, silted up, and the salmon couldn't get into the creek to spawn. And so what we
Mm.
did was we heard about the project, and we said, how can we help? And then they were raising funds. We were a contributor from a funding perspective, minor in the grand scheme of things because it turned out to be a big project. It was
Right.
being run by a young guy who had so much energy, and he just put it all together. We're just amazed by
Love
it.
it.
But what we did was we said, Keegan, what can we do to help? And so we were down at the creek, hauling topsoil to put along the edge of the creek, planting trees to grow cover, picking up some garbage, but mostly just hauling dirt. And we did 2 days of volunteer time. That we give our employees 23 hours a year of paid volunteer time. And so this was an
Hmm.
opportunity for us to go out together and participate in this thing. The results have been nothing short of astounding. There are now um, five different types of salmon that are spawning in the creek, and thousands of salmon fry that are now making their way back to the ocean. And we didn't do anything other than change the way that the creek bed or the creek
Hmm.
flowed into the Burrard Inlet. We didn't have to plant fish. They came from
No.
somewhere. We don't even know because there were no fish in the creek for many,
Right.
many years. So we're not even sure why they chose that creek, because typically they go back to the one they
Hmm.
that they hatched in. Anyway, so that was an example of how we combined our funds with the ability to participate.
And what does that do for the culture of the company, for for your employees who volunteer their time to do that?
Well, our last hire was a manager position, and he came to us because we were a B Corp. We told him what
Mm.
we're doing. Like, genuinely, when we go out, it's really nasty work. It's not that much
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah. Oh
especially
no,
when it's
I
pouring rain in Vancouver and you're out there slogging around in the mud. So it's not like we could say, yeah, it was a blast. It was
right.
fun because at the end of it and during the time, we were all working together. and everybody had a great sense of accomplishment in doing it.
Hmm.
And we look at the results, the videos that are taken underwater of the fry coming, and we all have a sense of accomplishment. We have a tremendous team, and I can honestly say that a lot of the enthusiasm and engagement we get is because of the values that we stand for, and not because of how much we pay them. And
Mm.
it's not that we pay them,
Yeah.
we pay above average remuneration, but the reality is that they're there and they're proud to be part of our company and proud to be doing the things that we're doing.
And I completely agree with that. I have been part of a company for the last 4 years where culture was such a big thing, and we do a lot of things together, including cleanups and things like that. But it makes you want to stay. It makes you have fun. It makes you look forward to going into work, whether there's a pandemic or not. It makes you look forward to interacting with fellow employees and team members and so forth. And it definitely makes a difference. As someone who's worked out of university for 20 years, it makes a huge difference from just going in and doing work. Like I used to go in and I was working as a marine biologist for the government. I used to go in and I didn't like it because the culture wasn't there.
Yes.
Whereas, going to work for a software company and the culture's there and you're like, oh, I can still do environmental things. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty cool and still have a good time. We could be doing more and I'm working on that. But it's phenomenal when you have a great culture like that. And like you said, some of this revitalization and things is really nasty work. It's long hours. It's tough. You're exhausted afterwards, but you get this sense of accomplishment. And might I say, first of all, congratulations on participating in a project that can bring back critical salmon. Like we're in critical need right now. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but we are in critical need for these salmon to come back and have these rivers that have been need to be restored and some dams that need to be taken out, and to get the salmon back up and running into certain places. And you're right, sometimes it's a mystery of why they come back
Yeah.
to like new rivers that have been sort of worked on, and why they don't come back to others. But we know it has to be clean, it has to be right, and the habitat has to be almost near perfect for them to be able to spawn. And for having 5 different types of species, yeah, that's a big high five in the office to be able to say that you were part of that program. That's fantastic. And even be able to identify the people that like you said, there's one champion, young guy who's wanted to do this, and to be identify someone who, because project could have been a catastrophe and not worked, and to identify someone who would be able to do that and manage that is also quite a talent. So I think that's really
And
great.
he was 100%
That's
volunteer.
amazing. That's amazing.
He didn't get paid a penny to
Yeah,
do it.
that's awesome.
And as a result, we also made a great or developed a great business relationship. He's a mortgage
Right.
broker, a young guy. We have a next generation group of advisors in our office, and they're still in touch. So it's funny how those connections get made, and we really value the connections that are made based on mutual
Hmm.
interest versus just the business
Right.
proposition. Um, it's just more fun
I love
working
it.
in that
I love it. I
space.
know we're coming just a little bit on time. I want to kind of cover one or two more questions. One of the questions, we've talked about it just a little bit before we pressed record, is you're kind of going not only just from a physical thing, I'm going to help restore a river, or I'm going to have the business help restore a river, but you're doing something in conservation that's not generally done quite a bit, especially from private companies. But you're working with an organization to help put in something that's more sustainable from a conservation perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that and to just kind of tell the audience of what you're doing and who you're working with?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the organizations that we came across through our 1% for the Planet membership, we were looking for nonprofits that were doing great work in the environment, and we came across an organization called EcoJustice, which used to be called I believe it was the Sierra Defense Fund here
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
Canada, which is separate and distinct from the
Hmm.
U.S. Branch. But EcoJustice is a team of lawyers, and all they do is fight cases in court and also hold governments to account on maintaining their own laws. And they'll go to bat for any environmental charity that's looking for support from a legal perspective. And so they've fought some pretty big battles, and we're really proud to be associated with him in the sense that we did a webinar on Earth Day last year where we raised $18,000 towards a new initiative, which is to bring about corporate climate accountability legislation in Canada, which is now we refer to as sustainable finance legislation, with the idea that if we can get all corporations, all companies in Canada measuring their GHGs and having to come up with a plan to get to net zero, we'll be taking a large step towards investors and consumers and business partners to be able to compare who they want to be doing business with and being able to hold to account companies that they do business
Yeah.
with uh, to meet their objectives. So we're really excited about that. Um, I I honestly believe that success in fighting climate change is going to be driven by how we can change the allocation of capital on this planet. If we can allocate capital away from the fossil fuel industry into renewable energy sources, if we can direct it towards impact investments versus brown investments or investments in companies that destroy the environment, we'll be going a long way to changing the
Yeah.
course of the Earth's future. And so within our industry, the insurance industry, it's $5.3 trillion that is managed by 5 companies in Canada. If through our insurance industry we can get the insurance companies to start reallocating capital differently than what they are, we would be very excited about that.
Hmm.
And just along that lines, doubling back to the B Corp journey is that um, by following our hearts and our inspiration to be better, we became a B Corp. We influenced one of the largest dealers who are our wholesalers in the
Hmm.
insurance industry to start on the B Corp journey. And so we're really excited to
Wow.
see that happen. And they announced it last year. We spoke at a conference where we talked about our journey. And what's really exciting is that they're owned by one of the 5 largest insurance companies in Canada, which means that somebody at that upper
Yeah.
echelon had to buy into the
Yeah.
concept. So if we can start making a difference in our insurance industry on how capital moves in this country, i.e., out of brown fossil fuel investments and into green and alternative and impact investments, we think that we'll do a great service not only to our clients but the entire community at large.
100%. I love that. I love that. I think that's amazing. My last question, it kind of has to do with what you just mentioned. If someone who's listening to this episode right now has a business, and they hear this from from Bernie Geiss, who has an insurance business, and sells insurance, and he's in a B Corp, and you obviously laid out the reasons why. What would you say, and what do you tell other business owners who might or might not be considering B Corp? What would you say like is the big selling point for B Corp, or why people would join?
Well, it depends on the person that you're talking to. I can tell you right now that there are people out there that just think this is all
Mm,
hogwash. And it doesn't matter what kind of logical argument we can come up with to tell them that, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. I think that if somebody talks to me about the B Corp space, my attitude is, what do you have to lose?
mm,
To start and to explore the process, it's not going to cost you anything. The B impact assessment is free. You walk through that. Maybe you pick some ideas up that help you be a better business, which means that you become more efficient, and which means that you lower costs. That's
yeah.
great. But at the very least, you'll get a sense of what your competition is about,
Mm,
because there's no hiding the fact that consumers are becoming more and more aware of the impact that the companies that they do business with are having on the environment. So the question is that do you want to be a leader or do you want to be a laggard? And if you decide that you want to be a leader, you have to explore this. If after exploring it you decide it's not for you, I say you did what's suggested. It doesn't
yep.
work. Find something
Yeah.
else. But to the companies that actually explore and take something away from it to make them a little bit better, it's been a
Yeah.
success. And to those companies that say, you know what, this is fantastic, let's go for it, let's do the whole thing, then by all means, that's a great thing that happens. But that's not a
Right.
requirement. It's up to every business owner to say, do I want to be better? Does this make sense for us? And is this something that we should spend our time on? And I would say, in my bias, from my bias perspective, it's absolutely worth every minute you spend on it. Um, because, hey, when we retire, when we leave our business, what are we going to
Yeah.
remember? Are we going to remember the good things that we did, or are we going to remember that we made a few extra
Right.
bucks along the way? Like, what is the scorecard that's important to you? And from that, you'll find a very rewarding path
I
forward.
love it. That was a great way to end the show. Bernie, thank you so much for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was so nice to have you on. I'd love to have you invite you back on sometime to talk more about some of the projects that you're in and get more detail. But this was a great introduction, and we love what you're doing. And I want to thank you so much for what you and the team have been doing in BC. And we look forward to continuing to hear more about all the different projects that you guys are up to and all the different successes that you're having.
Well, thanks so much, Andrew. Thank you very much for reaching out. It was a great surprise to get your message, and thank you for following up the answers to my question. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Bernie, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Really appreciate you coming through and all the work that you do and telling us about the work that you do. Just imagine being able to own a business that doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on the environment or on your local community other than providing people with their insurance. So in case something extreme happens in their life, God forbid, they're able to be okay. They're able to be comfortable. But then going beyond that and incorporating his values that, want to protect the environment, want to keep nature the way it is, want to help people, help with reconciliation, which, to be honest, is probably what he's probably doing what most people should be doing in and around their communities. But he's able to do that because he's independently sustainable through his business, which is great. And I think a lot of people, when they have businesses or they work for companies, including myself, work for a company that has nothing to do with the environment or protecting the environment, we often use that as I wish we could do something to protect the environment. Well, here he is in a position where he can, and he's able to go above and beyond and, use volunteer time through his company. And like a lot of companies have, you can take charitable vacation to be able to do work with charities. And I think that's really, or time leave or whatever that, or PTO, whatever that might be. I think that's really great because it brings a lot of satisfaction to the company and the people on the team, really is what it really comes down to. And I think that's really important. We do that at my company. And it gives me the inspiration to start taking more environmental policies and things that I want to propose in our company, in the company that I work for, to be able to say, hey, can we put together an environmental club or environmental committee to make sure that at the places that we do work, we're following the right guidelines and we're following making sure that we're sustainable. And I think that's really important. So that's something that I might be interested in doing if I have time, of course, to be able to bring that forward. So this is really great to see companies doing this. When I first came across Bernie and I saw that his company was a B Corp. Normally, I'm looking for clothes that are sustainable, or companies that work on renewable energy or something like that. When you come across a company like his, where you're just he sells insurance. Well, that's interesting. Why would somebody who sells insurance want to be part of the B Corp certification? Because he has values. He has that want to help people and to help the environment, and he wants to bring that through his business. And I think that's wonderful. It's something that I don't think a lot of people think about. And I think it's really important to be able to say, hey, we can help, and we may not know where to go, but the guidelines of the certification process with the B Corp can help. It can help guide people to being better, being a better company overall, which is also great for their employees, for their team, their staff. I think that's really great. So I was really excited to be able to talk to Bernie today. And so thank you again, Bernie, for coming on the podcast. I think it's really great what he's doing, what his team is doing, what his company is doing, and what he does individually. And bringing out, he was telling me, talking about programs where he brings high school students to, local indigenous reserves to be able to interact and work with them, to help them in and around and build that relationship, right, that we really need when it comes to relationships between Canadians and indigenous peoples. And I think that's something that is missing. And it really just comes down to building trust, building relationships on both sides to almost start not necessarily start anew, but start to reconcile those relationships. So thanks again for Bernie for coming out. And again, thank you for exactly what you do. I think it's great. Love to have you back on to talk more about what you're doing. And he introduced me to Travis Bays from Bodhi Surf and Yoga. He's going to introduce me to a couple of other people, which we'll have on the podcast. So again, thank you for being that person to be able to introduce me to a variety of people. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments about, what this company is doing, what Bernie's doing, or about this episode, please feel free to connect with me. You can connect with me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And just by the way, if you're listening to this on Spotify, Spotify has these new polls that I can ask. I can ask questions on these polls. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm not sure exactly what question I'm going to ask at this point, but I'm going to start asking questions for every episode. So please feel free to look. If you're a Spotify listener and you listen to this podcast on Spotify, please go and look at those polls and interact. I'd love to hear your feedback on some of those questions. It kind of helps us with the engagement on different apps, which I really, really like. So I'm experimenting with that. So if you're a Spotify listener, please feel free to go and look at those polls. But other than that, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Again, thank you to Bernie, and thank you for you to listen, for the audience for listening. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you know someone who might be interested in listening to this kind of stuff on this episode, please feel free to share it. It's free to share. All you do is click the copy link on your app that you're listening to and send it to a friend. But thanks again for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.